It is day 2 of the Sean Diddy Combs federal trial. Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, she is one of Combs' many accusers.
You won't believe what just went down in the most explosive celebrity court case of the year. The music world is absolutely stunned right now as tensions reached their breaking point when Cassie stepped up to that witness stand.
Brown dress, form-fitting, visibly pregnant, head held high, and did not make any eye contact with the defendant, with Sean Combs.
Nobody saw this coming, but when she opened her mouth on day 2, everything changed. The industry will never be the same after what happened next. Wait until you hear what she revealed and how Diddy completely lost control in front of everyone.
And she said that she did it because she was 22, 21, she was young, she didn't know it.
This is the courtroom moment everyone's talking about, and trust me, you'll want to stick around for every shocking detail. Hit that subscribe button right now because this breakdown is about to give you the insider perspective that no one else is covering. The atmosphere in that courtroom was electric from the moment the doors opened on the second day of this high-profile trial. You could practically feel the tension hanging in the air. The world's eyes were fixed on this celebrity showdown, a music mogul with decades of influence facing off against his former partner who was finally ready to speak her truth. This wasn't just another tabloid story, this was the culmination of years of silence, and everyone knew something big was about to happen. Spectators packed the benches, reporters clutched their notepads, and social media was already buzzing with speculation. The first day had set the stage with formal statements and procedural motions, but it was clear that day 2 would be when the real drama unfolded. Nobody in that room could have predicted just how intense things would get, how quickly the power would shift, or how completely one person's composure would crumble under the weight of exposed secrets. Let's quickly recap what led us to this pivotal moment. Day 1 had passed with relative calm, the kind of calm that often precedes a storm. The proceedings moved along with the expected legal formalities. Lawyers from both sides presented their opening statements, laying out roadmaps of what they intended to prove. Diddy maintained his confident demeanor throughout, occasionally whispering to his legal team, seemingly unfazed by what was transpiring. He projected the image of a man who believed the situation was under control, someone who had navigated industry challenges for decades and expected this to be no different. Cassie, meanwhile, appeared reserved during the initial proceedings. She sat quietly, her emotions carefully contained but visibly bubbling beneath the surface. Her testimony on that first day had been brief but emotionally charged, giving just a glimpse of what was to come. Those who watched closely noticed her determination, the look of someone who had made peace with her decision to speak out regardless of the consequences. The courtroom adjourned that evening with a deceptive sense of order, but everyone felt the undercurrent of anticipation. This was merely the setup for what would become a defining moment in entertainment industry history. As day 2 began, there was a noticeable shift in energy. The gallery filled quickly, with latecomers struggling to find seats. Reporters positioned themselves strategically, knowing that today's proceedings would likely dominate headlines. When Cassie entered, something about her was different. The nervousness of day 1 had transformed into resolute purpose. She walked with measured steps to the witness stand, made her oath, and took her seat. Her posture was straight, her gaze direct, and her voice steady as she prepared to share her experiences. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore, it was about standing up for herself and others who had suffered similar circumstances in silence. The courtroom fell into a hush so complete you could hear the subtle click of the court reporter's keyboard. Every person present sensed that they were about to witness something extraordinary, a moment when years of carefully guarded secrets would finally come to light. Cassie began her testimony by painting a picture of her early relationship with Diddy. She spoke about their initial meeting, how she had been overwhelmed by his charm and industry clout, and how what began as a professional relationship slowly evolved into something more personal. Her words were carefully chosen, her tone measured but authentic as she described the early days that had once seemed so full of promise. But then her testimony took a turn that captivated everyone present. She began sharing details about life behind closed doors, stories that contradicted the glamorous public image the couple had projected for years. She described patterns of control that started subtly at first, suggestions about her appearance, her music, her friends, but gradually intensified into something more restrictive and alarming. With remarkable composure, she detailed incidents of emotional manipulation, explaining how her independence was systematically dismantled until she felt trapped in the relationship. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as she revealed how her career decisions, personal relationships, and even daily movements became subject to his approval. But that was just the beginning. Cassie's testimony then shifted to darker territory as she began describing instances of physical intimidation and abuse. Her voice remained steady, but the emotion behind her words was palpable as she recounted specific episodes that had left her afraid and feeling powerless. She described nights of terror, moments when arguments escalated beyond verbal confrontations, and the subsequent pressure to maintain a perfect public facade despite her private suffering. What made her testimony particularly compelling was the level of detail she provided, specific dates, locations, and circumstances that lent credibility to each allegation. She explained how she had documented certain incidents, saved text messages, and confided in a small circle of trusted friends who could corroborate her accounts. With each new revelation, the weight of her words seemed to press heavier on everyone in the room, especially Diddy, whose reaction was becoming increasingly visible. As Cassie continued her testimony, all eyes occasionally shifted to Diddy to gauge his response. The transformation in his demeanor was remarkable and telling. When proceedings began, he had maintained the same confident posture from day one, leaning back slightly in his chair, occasionally writing notes to his attorneys, his expression neutral and controlled. But as Cassie's testimony progressed, that carefully constructed facade began to crack. First came the subtle signs, a tightening around his eyes, fingers drumming silently on the table, jaw muscles flexing as he clenched his teeth. His legal team noticed the shift, with his lead attorney occasionally placing a cautionary hand on his arm when his body language became too expressive. But these gentle reminders seemed to have diminishing effects as Cassie delved deeper into her accusations. By mid-morning, Diddy's discomfort had evolved into visible agitation. He shifted constantly in his seat, shook his head in disagreement, and scribbled furious notes that his lawyers barely had time to read. The controlled image he had cultivated throughout his career, the unflappable music mogul who always held the upper hand, was disintegrating with each minute that passed. His eyes, previously cool and calculating, now darted around the room, as if searching for an escape from the narrative unfolding before him. His legal team recognized the danger signs and requested a brief recess, but the judge, sensing the momentum of the testimony, denied the request and instructed Cassie to continue. This ruling seemed to further unsettle Diddy, whose breathing became noticeably heavier as he loosened his tie and whispered urgently to his counsel. The power dynamic in the room was shifting dramatically, and everyone could feel it, especially Diddy himself. The tension in the courtroom continued to escalate to almost unbearable levels. Reporters who had covered countless celebrity trials remarked later that they had never experienced such a charged atmosphere. Court officers positioned themselves more strategically around the room, sensing the building pressure. The judge's gavel remained within easy reach as she monitored the proceedings with heightened vigilance. Cassie's testimony had created an invisible divide in the courtroom, those who watched her with growing admiration for her courage, and those who glanced nervously at Diddy, wondering how much more he could withstand before something gave way. His attorneys attempted to appear unfazed, but their increased conferences and concerned glances toward their client betrayed their anxiety about the situation's trajectory. Legal analysts present noted how unusual it was to see such raw emotion in a setting typically characterized by procedural formality. Veterans of the justice system exchanged knowing looks. They had seen defendants lose composure before, but rarely someone of Diddy's stature and media training. The gallery remained completely silent, afraid that even the smallest sound might break the spell or trigger the explosion that seemed increasingly inevitable. Each new detail Cassie shared seemed to tighten the emotional spring that Diddy was desperately trying to control. His legal team's expressions grew increasingly concerned as they recognized that their client's ability to maintain composure was rapidly deteriorating. What had begun as a battle of carefully prepared legal strategies was transforming into something much more unpredictable and potentially damaging. While all of this drama was unfolding inside the courtroom, an equally intense situation was developing outside. News of Cassie's testimony spread rapidly across social media platforms and news outlets. Reporters stationed outside the courthouse delivered breathless updates to their networks, while social media exploded with hashtags related to the trial. Within hours, clips of courtroom sketches paired with descriptions of Cassie's testimony went viral, drawing millions of engagements across platforms. Celebrity reactions began pouring in, with industry figures carefully choosing sides or offering diplomatic statements of concern. Former associates of both Diddy and Cassie found themselves bombarded with requests for comments or additional insights. The trial had transcended typical entertainment news to become a cultural moment, a public reckoning about power dynamics in the music industry and relationships between influential men and the women in their orbits. Media outlets scrambled to provide context, digging through archives for previous interviews, public appearances, and statements that might corroborate or contradict the narrative unfolding in court. Old videos of the couple resurfaced, now viewed through an entirely different lens based on Cassie's allegations. Entertainment news programs interrupted their scheduled content to provide special coverage, bringing in expert panels to analyze the legal and cultural implications of what was transpiring. For those inside the courtroom without access to their phones, this external frenzy remained unknown, but its energy seemed to seep through the walls nonetheless, adding to the already charged atmosphere. The trial had become much bigger than a dispute between two individuals. It had transformed into a watershed moment that would likely influence industry practices and public conversations for years to come. The breaking point came shortly after noon. Cassie was describing a particularly disturbing incident that had allegedly occurred during an industry event afterparty. Her testimony had reached its most damning section, detailed, specific, and profoundly unsettling. As she recounted how Diddy had allegedly reacted when she attempted to leave the relationship, something inside him finally snapped. Without warning, Diddy slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "That's a lie. You know that's not how it happened." His voice echoed through the courtroom, shattering the controlled atmosphere that had been maintained despite the emotional testimony. His lawyers immediately tried to restrain him, physically placing hands on his shoulders to push him back into his seat, but he shrugged them off, continuing his outburst. "I made you. Everything you have is because of me," he continued, pointing an accusatory finger at Cassie. "You're twisting everything." His face had transformed completely. Gone was the media-trained mogul, replaced by someone overwhelmed by rage and panic. Court officers moved quickly toward the defense table as the judge repeatedly banged her gavel, calling for order. Cassie, remarkably, remained composed on the witness stand, her expression a mixture of vindication and sadness as she watched her former partner's public unraveling. She didn't flinch or look away, a stark contrast to Diddy's loss of control. Her attorney placed a protective arm slightly in front of her, though she remained physically far from the commotion. The judge's voice cut through the chaos with practiced authority as she declared, "Order. We will have order in this court immediately." When Diddy continued his verbal assault, she didn't hesitate to address him directly. "Mr. Combs, control yourself or you will be held in contempt. Counsel, control your client now." The warning carried unmistakable severity. Diddy's lead attorney, visibly alarmed by this turn of events, stood and requested an immediate recess, which the judge granted with obvious reluctance. "We will take 30 minutes, she announced, her displeasure evident. "And when we return, I expect complete professionalism from everyone in this courtroom." With another sharp bang of her gavel, she exited to her chambers. Diddy was quickly escorted out by his legal team, who formed a protective huddle around him as they moved toward a private conference room. His face was flushed, tie askew, the perfect image he had maintained for decades now completely shattered. Witnesses reported that even in the hallway, his voice could be heard as he continued to vent his frustration to his lawyers, who desperately attempted to calm him down before proceedings resumed. For those few chaotic moments, the carefully constructed persona that had defined Diddy's public image for decades completely dissolved, revealing something raw and unguarded beneath. Court observers with decades of experience noted that such outbursts often prove more damaging than any testimony, as they provide jurors and the public with an unfiltered glimpse of character that no amount of subsequent composure can erase. The 30-minute recess stretched to nearly an hour as Diddy's legal team worked to restore their client's composure and develop a strategy to mitigate the damage of his outburst. When court finally reconvened, the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. Diddy returned looking physically composed, his tie straightened, his expression once again neutral. But the psychological impact of what had transpired couldn't be undone. Everyone had seen behind the curtain, and there was no going back. The judge began with a stern warning about courtroom decorum, making it clear that any further outbursts would result in serious consequences. Diddy nodded mechanically at her words, but his eyes remained fixed on the table before him, unable or unwilling to meet the gaze of anyone in the room. His attorneys appeared tense, aware that their defense strategy had been severely compromised by their client's behavior. Cassie returned to the witness stand with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout, ready to continue her testimony despite the dramatic interruption. The contrast between her composed demeanor and Diddy's earlier explosion only highlighted the shifting narrative of the trial. Where he had once been perceived as the powerful figure in control, he now appeared volatile and unstable, while she emerged as resolute and credible. As the proceedings continued, a subtle but significant change was evident in how people in the courtroom responded to Cassie's words. There was a new attentiveness, a deeper belief in her account that hadn't been there before Diddy's outburst. His reaction had inadvertently lent credibility to her claims in a way that no amount of testimony alone could have achieved. The remainder of the day's session progressed without further incident, but the damage had been done. The narrative had been irrevocably altered. In the hours and days that followed, the aftermath of Diddy's courtroom breakdown spread far beyond the legal proceedings. Entertainment news cycles were dominated by analyses of what had transpired, with legal experts weighing in on how his behavior might influence the outcome of the trial. Social media platforms were flooded with discussions about the power dynamics in the music industry, with many sharing their own experiences of intimidation and control in professional relationships. For Diddy, the consequences were immediate and severe. Several business partners issued statements, temporarily pausing their relationships with him pending the outcome of the trial. A major advertising campaign featuring his image was quietly shelved, and appearances that had been scheduled for upcoming industry events were cancelled. The carefully cultivated empire he had built over decades suddenly appeared vulnerable as associates and brands sought to distance themselves from the controversy. Public opinion, which had initially been divided with many defending the music mogul, shifted dramatically after reports of his courtroom behavior circulated. Former skeptics of Cassie's claims found themselves reconsidering their positions in light of his reaction. Industry figures who had remained silent began cautiously expressing support for Cassie, with several female artists in particular praising her courage in coming forward despite the obvious risks to her career and personal life. For Cassie, the experience was bittersweet. While vindication brought a certain relief, reliving traumatic experiences in such a public forum took an emotional toll that was evident to those close to her. Yet she had accomplished something significant. She had reclaimed her narrative and broken free from the shadow of fear that had followed her for years. Support flooded in from survivors' advocacy groups, fellow artists, and fans who recognized the courage it took to speak truth to power. Her attorney later remarked that in all their years of practice, they had never seen someone maintain such dignity under such intense pressure. She wasn't testifying for revenge, they noted in a brief press statement. She was testifying for closure, for healing, and ultimately for change. That perspective resonated with many who followed the case, transforming what might have been dismissed as celebrity drama into a meaningful conversation about accountability and power. As the trial continued in the following days, legal experts noted a marked change in Diddy's defense strategy. His team shifted from aggressive denial to damage control, focusing less on discrediting Cassie's claims and more on contextualizing his actions and emphasizing his contributions to the music industry and various charitable causes. This pivot was widely interpreted as an acknowledgement that their client's courtroom behavior had undermined their original approach. Diddy himself appeared transformed when he returned to court, subdued, carefully controlled, and visibly affected by the turning tide. Gone was the imposing figure who had entered the proceedings with confident swagger. In his place sat someone who seemed to be coming to terms with the reality that this was one situation he couldn't manipulate or control through charm, money, or influence. For perhaps the first time in his illustrious career, he appeared genuinely vulnerable. The road ahead for both parties remained uncertain. Legal proceedings of this nature are complex and unpredictable, often extending far beyond the courtroom into settlement discussions and appeals. What was certain, however, was that regardless of the eventual legal outcome, the court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. Cassie had achieved something powerful in simply being heard and believed, while Diddy faced the challenge of rebuilding a reputation that had taken decades to construct but only moments to damage. Industry insiders began speculating about the long-term implications for both careers. For Cassie, many anticipated new opportunities as her bravery resonated with audiences and fellow artists. Several production companies reportedly expressed interest in her story, seeing potential for a powerful documentary or limited series about her experiences. Music executives who had previously been hesitant to work with her due to her connection to Diddy now viewed her in a new light, as someone whose strength and authenticity could connect powerfully with audiences. For Diddy, the path forward appeared far more complicated. While his established success and substantial resources meant he wouldn't disappear from the industry overnight, the nature of his brand had fundamentally changed. His carefully crafted image as a visionary mogul who lifted others up had been seriously compromised by Cassie's testimony and his own courtroom behavior. Rebuilding would require not just time and strategic public relations, but genuine reflection and change, something that skeptics questioned whether he was capable of demonstrating. The trial itself was far from over. The legal process would continue its methodical pace, with more witnesses to be called and evidence to be presented. Diddy's legal team would have their opportunity to present their defense and cross-examine Cassie's claims. But something fundamental had shifted on that second day that couldn't be undone by any subsequent testimony or legal maneuvering. A truth had been spoken that resonated far beyond the specifics of the case, touching on broader conversations about power, accountability, and the courage it takes to speak up against influential figures. For those who witnessed day 2 of the trial, whether in person, through media reports, or via the countless discussions it sparked, the experience was unforgettable. It represented one of those rare moments when public perception shifts decisively, when carefully maintained facades crumble, and when someone previously silenced finds their voice in a way that changes not just their own narrative, but potentially an entire industry's culture. As legal analysts later observed, cases involving high-profile personalities often transcend their specific allegations to become cultural touchstones that reflect broader societal reckonings. This particular courtroom confrontation had all the elements of such a watershed moment: a powerful industry figure, long-standing allegations finally brought to light, and a dramatic public unraveling that seemed to confirm what many had long suspected but few had dared to say aloud. In the music industry specifically, the implications were already becoming apparent. Record labels and management companies began proactively reviewing their practices and policies regarding artist relationships and workplace behavior. Several announced new initiatives focused on creating safer environments, particularly for young female artists navigating an industry historically dominated by powerful men. Veteran industry figures publicly acknowledged that such changes were long overdue, with some admitting they had witnessed troubling behaviors but remained silent out of fear or self-interest. For everyday people following the case, particularly those who had experienced similar dynamics in their own relationships, Cassie's testimony and Diddy's reaction provided a powerful validation. Social media filled with messages from individuals sharing how watching the powerful held accountable, even temporarily, gave them courage to reconsider their own situations. Support groups reported increased engagement from people seeking resources to leave controlling relationships, citing the high-profile case as a catalyst for their decision to seek help. The legal teams for both sides continued their work away from the cameras, preparing for subsequent days of testimony and cross-examination. Settlement discussions reportedly intensified behind closed doors, with Diddy's representatives allegedly pushing for a resolution that would prevent further testimony and public exposure. Whatever financial compensation might eventually be agreed upon, however, the emotional and reputational consequences had already taken effect in ways no settlement could reverse. As day turned to evening and court adjourned, the media circus outside the courthouse showed no signs of dispersing. Reporters delivered their final updates of the day, already speculating about what Day 3 might bring. Industry insiders exchanged theories about long-term career implications, while social media continued to dissect every available detail. The story had captured public attention in a way few legal proceedings managed to achieve. For Cassie, leaving the courthouse meant returning to a world forever changed by her decision to speak out. Friends reported that despite the emotional toll of the day, she expressed a profound sense of relief at having finally shared her truth, regardless of the eventual legal outcome. After years of silence and fear, she had reclaimed her voice in the most public way possible. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as someone who had already overcome the most difficult step, breaking the silence that had once felt impossible to shatter. For Diddy, the night brought different realizations. Decades of carefully constructed image management had been undone in moments of uncontrolled emotion. The power he had wielded so effectively throughout his career suddenly seemed diminished as former allies distanced themselves and public opinion turned against him. His team worked frantically on damage control strategies, but the authentic reaction the world had witnessed couldn't be explained away or reframed through careful PR statements. As the sun set on Day 2 of the trial, one thing was abundantly clear to everyone following the case: what had transpired in that courtroom would have reverberations far beyond the specific legal dispute between two individuals. A significant shift had occurred, not just in this particular narrative, but in the broader conversation about accountability, power, and the courage it takes to speak truth regardless of the consequences. Wow, what a journey we've been on together through this incredible courtroom drama. I've never seen anything quite like what happened between Diddy and Cassie on that second day of trial. The way she maintained her composure while he completely lost control was something straight out of a movie, except this was real life with real consequences. If you found this breakdown as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth coverage of the stories that matter. I promise to keep bringing you the latest updates on this case as it unfolds, plus exclusive insights you won't find anywhere else. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's video. I'd love to know what part of this courtroom showdown surprised you the most. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.